0191 488 3188 Cowgate. How many of you know where it is? How many of you drive through there? Or maybe you used to live there. Oh, I pass that pub every day. Well, it's tonight's Grizzly Tale. Not so long ago, instead of being a suburb of Newcastle, Cowgate was a small farming community, separated from the city by fields and woodland. The main farm and coaching house stood where a large pub restaurant can now be found. In the early 1800s, there was a mystery that to this day has still not accurately been solved. The clues are all there, and it wouldn't take a detective to see how things could so easily have accelerated. Amos Williams was the man who owned the land. He'd put a tenant in to run his farm and another to run a coaching inn. Amos lived near a Hexham. He had enough on his plate with his farm there, so it was far easier to rake in monies made by those employed to do it. The coaching house was run by Edward Hawes, and the farm by Frederick Patterson. Sadly, the two would never get on. Instead of working together for the maximum profit, they were constantly sniping at each other. One always criticising the other, complaining that they were inept or angry, that they'd left livestock or goods where they shouldn't have. Williams knew of the antagonism and once a month had to contend with them bleating about one another. It was rather sad as both men were hard-working and decent, but such was the personality clash that life would always be verging on antagonism. So when Hawes began providing extra services to the guests at his coaching house, Pattinson alerted Williams immediately. At first, the farmer was against it. However, pretty much all the other inns in the area provided working girls to travellers, and it doubled their profits. So Williams decided it would be best to turn a blind eye to it for a healthy bit of extra money that could slide nicely into his back pocket. Patterson was furious as he had to stand by and watch as they made more money while he struggled on as a farmer. Now, one of the ladies was called Caroline Bourne, a raven-haired 19-year-old who, along with three other resident folderols, were housed in the attic area of the coaching inn. They would pay a percentage for every man they hooked as rent to the inn. They would simply be in the tavern and ply their wares wherever possible. Patterson soon began to infatuate on Caroline. She would always chat to him as he moved livestock through the yard of the inn. He was more than taken by her, and on several occasions asked her to walk out with him. She knew that her profession would not really tolerate a relationship, so had kept refusing his persistent advances. And then he heard that Hawes, his arch-enemy, had been dallying with her, and that was the final straw. One evening around dusk, the unconscious body of Edward Hawes was found propped up against a wall. His skull had been cracked with a rock, and he needed to be stitched up. The following 8 weeks saw him get back on his feet again, although now his speech was slurred and his gait was rather unwieldy. The lovely Caroline had been persuaded by Patterson to marry him, and she had given up her street profession. Her place at the coaching inn had been taken by a loud, garish blonde girl called Marion Hodgson. The new Mr. and Mrs. Patterson were happy, but Hawes kept winding him up, saying unpleasant things about Caroline. "Does she miss bedding me?" he would shout when catching Patterson on his own. This was a powder keg waiting to explode. About a month later, Hawes disappeared, and after a normal night's work, he just never found his way to bed. The clues as to what happened to him include a stand-up row the week before between Caroline Patterson and Hawes that had led him to slapping her so hard